Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and we're sorry about the long delay. Um, we're glad you're here, and yet so I'll kind of start over. So we're dealing with some technical difficulties. We've had some difficulty getting Facebook and Zoom to talk with each other. But so we've resorted to using Zoom webinar here. So thank you for those of you who have made it. And for those of the you who don't make it in, if you know other people who are trying to be here but couldn't, we'll have a recording of this lecture as well. So let me get started here. This is the 30th annual Westheimer Peace Symposium. And I'm welcoming you here on behalf of Wilmington College, in Wilmington, Ohio. Just let me pull out my Wilmington, Ohio. And this is the 30th annual Westheimer Peace Symposium, focusing on peace and the nature of war through a special 2-day symposium entitled The Nuclear Threat, Past, Present, Future, in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan by the United States. Thank you to all who are joining us via the live stream for this virtual keynote address and who have joined us here on Zoom. At this time, I invite Wilmington College President Erica Goodwin to provide opening remarks. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Tanya. And again, our apologies for the technical difficulties, and my apologies to Susie, our speaker, who's been waiting patiently, but thank you for joining us tonight and good evening. We are proud that we are hosting the 30th annual Westheimer Peace Symposium. I'm Dr. Erica Goodwin, and it is my privilege and honor to be serving WC as its interim president. I hope you have been moved by the powerful messages from our Westheimer Peace Symposium today. Throughout the day, I have heard some outstanding speakers and stirring artistic presentations through the Response Project. Tomorrow's lineup of events will no doubt be just as meaningful and impactful. The symposium is an annual signature program for Wilmington College, and we are very proud of its legacy. Wilmington College was founded by the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers, in 1870, and as such, it is deeply rooted in historic Quaker values or testimonies. These values include peace, social justice, respect for all persons, diversity, integrity, community, excellence, and service to others. It is through the incredible work of our dedicated staff, faculty, and students, and both our Quaker Heritage Center and Peace Resource Center, that an outstanding annual symposium is developed each year. I can say I have looked forward to the symposium for the last 30 years. I've been on the faculty here at Wilmington College for the last 25 years, and an administrator for about half that time as well, and a student prior to that. Indeed, I was a freshman in college in the fall of 1991, the first year of this symposium. I can share that I've only missed a couple of years in the 30 years of its existence. The theme in the inaugural year was around the nature of war and opened a dialogue for what was called, quote, a peaceful world for the human family, unquote. Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, Arun Gandhi, was a keynote speaker on November 12, 1991. He spoke about the relevance of nonviolence in today's world. He noted a quote from Mahatma Gandhi just 6 weeks before his assassination in January of 1948, in which Gandhi said, quote, "This is no longer about violence and nonviolence, but between existence and non-existence," unquote. How unfortunate and apropos that this is still applicable today, over 70 years later. Now more than ever, we need programs and dialogue on peace and nonviolence that continue to build understanding and impact change. The Westheimer Peace Symposium has 4 rotating themes: peace and nonviolence, peace and social justice, peace and the environment, and peace and the nature of war. This peace lecture series was established in 1991 after philanthropist Charles and May Westheimer of Cincinnati, Ohio, endowed an annual lecture series to reflect the Quaker commitment to peacemaking, social justice, humanitarian service, and respect for all persons. Since then, the annual symposium has brought together national and international speakers to address peace, society, and the environment during day-long conversations with the college, community, and guests. We received many comments from our students that indicate the symposium raises awareness about current events, social justice, and the ways in which humans can respond to personal, community, and international crises. Since its inception, the symposium has continued to grow, expanding its audience and its influence on Wilmington College and the surrounding community. This year's symposium is completely virtual, with the same theme as that inaugural year, peace and the nature of war. As Tanya mentioned, this year's symposium is entitled The Nuclear Threat, Past, Present, and Future. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Mary Westheimer, Charles and May's daughter, who provided pre-recorded opening remarks this morning, and Bill Westheimer, Charles and May's son, who will provide pre-recorded closing remarks on Friday. This year's symposium features 22 presenters and 7 artists commemorating the recent 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki through a collaboration between Wilmington College's Peace Resource Center, which houses an extensive internationally recognized archive of atomic bombing materials, and artistic presentations on the topic through the Response Project. I wish to thank all of these presenters and artists for their participation in this year's symposium. The Response Project is an ongoing series conceived by Wilmington College Assistant Professor of Music, Dr. Brianna Motzke, and is funded by the Ohio Arts Council. 7 artists from across the United States were invited to provide an original artistic composition in response to archival materials found at the Peace Resource Center's Barbara Reynolds Memorial Archives. I wish to express my deepest appreciation to Dr. Tanya Moss, Director of our campus Peace Resource Center and Quaker Heritage Center, and Clerk of our Westheimer Planning Committee. Her work reflects her deep devotion to the testimony of peace and social justice, and we could not offer programs such as this symposium without her leadership. Thank you, Tanya. I also wish to thank the entire Planning Committee, Dr. Cole Dawson, Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, Mrs. Nancy McCormick, Campus Minister, and faculty Dr. Elizabeth Haynes-Wiggett, Dr. Brianna Matzke, and Dr. Stephen Potoff. Special thanks to Brianna for her work on the Response Project. Thanks goes out as well to the Peace Resource Center and Quaker Heritage Center student staff for their constant support of Tanya and willingness to help with all matter of things Westheimer related. And of course, a virtual symposium cannot be successful without tremendous technical support. My thanks goes out to our campus experts who have worked so hard to make this program successful. Ashley Wellman, Mitch Blankspor, Brianna Matzke, Hannah Fugit, George Domitic, and all of our IT staff. And now, without further ado, I welcome Susie Snyder, joining us from the Netherlands, to deliver the opening keynote address, Don't Bank on the Bomb, How Small Steps Lead to Lasting Change. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Erica. I'll briefly introduce Susie before she starts. And Susie is here tonight to offer, as Erica mentioned, our keynote address entitled Don't Bank on the Bomb, How Small Steps Lead to Lasting Change. Ms. Snyder coordinates the PACS ICANN Don't Bank on the Bomb research and campaign, and PACS's interim and she's a PACS interim humanitarian disarmament leader. She's an expert on nuclear weapons with over 2 decades of experience working at the intersect between nuclear weapons and human rights. In addition to the annual Don't Bank on the Bomb reports, Susie has published numerous reports and articles and has contributed to several recent books, most recently, A World Free from Nuclear Weapons, this 2020. Susie represents PACS on the International Steering Group of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize winning International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. She is a 2016 Nuclear Free Future Award laureate, Previously, she was Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom at their Geneva Secretariat, President of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom at the United Nations Office. She was named Hero of Las Vegas in 2001 for her work with indigenous populations against U.S. nuclear weapons development and nuclear waste dumping. Susie currently lives in Utrecht, the Netherlands, with her husband and son. Susie, thank you so much for being with us. We welcome you warmly, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you so much, Dr. Goodwin, for those lovely opening remarks. Thanks everybody for joining us this evening. It's great to be here. I'm sorry we couldn't be together in person, but this is almost better because I get to be with you from my home and hopefully into yours. I really appreciate everybody who worked so hard to bring this event to life. Now tonight, I'm going to talk about money, I'm going to talk about power, and I'm going to talk about weapons. And I know that a lot of people think it's not nice to talk about these things. In fact, in my family, we learned that in polite society, you don't ask questions about what something costs, or for goodness sakes, never about what someone earns. And a lot of people really think it's kind of crass. We also don't talk about power, not in any specific way, not really. We talk about those elected people or the corporations or just some vague other. The idea of asking how much power someone has is akin to asking how much money. It's rude. It's impolite. But do you know what's really rude? Nuclear weapons are rude. Nuclear weapons are designed to destroy cities. They are designed that way. They are bombs that burst and cause fires. They leave a radioactive legacy. And in some places, that legacy is so horrific that people will never be able to safely walk there again. Nuclear weapons are not elegant. They are designed to intimidate, to instill fear, and to unleash grotesque violence on people and the environment. Nuclear weapons are crude. They are clumsy weapons. In fact, their clumsiness is recognized by the International Red Cross. And they say nuclear weapons can't be used without causing indiscriminate harm. They can't be used without violating the fundamental principles that underpin the laws of war. Nuclear weapons are overwhelming. But soon, nuclear weapons will be illegal. Thanks to the efforts of governments, international institutions, and civil society, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Ban Treaty, will soon become international law. And that treaty didn't just come out of nowhere. It was the efforts of a broad public and civil society who gathered and galvanized support for this disarmament initiative. And we are driven by a humanitarian imperative to work to strengthen international law, to protect people and the environment, to advance our society so we together can wholeheartedly reject old, clumsy tools of indiscriminate harm. We are the change makers. We have power. But it's not always nice to talk about power. And it feels kind of uncomfortable sometimes, especially if it feels like you're a person who doesn't have any power. And I don't have any nuclear weapons. I don't imagine anyone watching this has any nuclear weapons of their own. And so it can really feel like those 9 men who get to decide whether or not to fire the missiles, it can feel like they have all the power. But I'm going to tell you, they don't. They don't have the power to control public opinion, despite their best efforts to do so. And we know that because polls show that significant majorities in nuclear armed countries want the bomb banned. Those 9 guys don't have the power to control other governments, although they really try. And let me give you an example. When we were getting ready to negotiate the ban treaty, we'd done all these international conferences. There were tons of meetings here and there and everywhere. We talked about risk and humanitarian consequences and all of these different things. We tried to get a consensus solution. We tried for decades to get everyone on board, but it wasn't working. And finally, a group of brave countries said enough is enough. So they put forward a proposal to start negotiations on a new legal instrument to make nuclear weapons illegal. And the nuclear armed countries didn't like it. Just like smokers don't like being told that smoking has to be done outside. The nuclear armed countries knew taking this step to make the taboo against nuclear weapons an actual law, that would be the beginning of the end of the bomb. So they tried to fight it. We actually got hold of a memo that was circulated to NATO governments when the idea of negotiations really started to take hold. And they specifically asked other NATO countries to vote no on any vote that might start negotiations for a nuclear ban treaty. It was the US government that wrote the memo, and they asked the NATO international staff members to circulate it. And the memo went on to say, ban advocates seek to shift the focus to one that aims primarily to stigmatize nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence. They weren't wrong. The document showed clearly the US believed a treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons, even one negotiated without them, would have a significant impact, and it will. A couple of weeks ago, Ward Wilson wrote a great article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. He talked about nuclear weapons not as tools of warfare, but as symbols. He likened them to the ceremonial swords that are worn by Marines. And he said, the difference between nuclear weapons and ceremonial swords is that with the swords, there's no confusion about the military utility. Everyone knows that swords are obsolete weapons. But in the case of nuclear weapons, the two different aspects seem to get confused. The people who make nuclear weapons policy seem to believe that they have enormous power, conflating their symbolic meaning with their practical usefulness. And that's one of the ways we'll win, because we together are revealing the man behind the nuclear curtain. We're using tools like the ban treaty to stigmatize nuclear weapons into obsolescence. We've talked about weapons, talked a little bit about power. Now I'm going to talk about the money, because following the money is a way to use our power, our agency, to make it clear that nothing to do with nuclear weapons is acceptable. Not as big, clumsy bombs, and not as symbols either. You see, the ban treaty makes it illegal to assist, encourage, or induce anyone to manufacture or develop nuclear weapons. And when Cuba ratified the treaty not too long ago, it included a small note with its ratification. And that note read, the financing of any activity prohibited to a state party under this treaty is also a prohibited activity. Cuba is one of many who raised this issue during the negotiations, consistently calling for a clear understanding that the treaty prohibition on assistance included financing. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it totally makes sense, right? If something is illegal, you shouldn't be able to invest in companies that make it. It also has a legal precedent. In the Oxford Public International Law Commentary on the Chemical Weapons Convention, assistance is understood to include the provision through financial resources to anyone who is resolved to engage in such a prohibited activity. And they went on to explain that anyone could be not only a state, whether or not it's party to the convention, but also an organization, an enterprise, a person, or a group of persons. And I'll tell you, we know when you prevent the financing of a weapons manufacturer, eventually the weapons stop getting made. We know because we did that with cluster bombs. Even though the US never signed the treaty banning cluster bombs, there's no US company that will make them anymore. And they cited pressure from financial institutions. And producers of cluster munitions stopped production. Companies like Textron, Orbital ATK, and the world's biggest weapons manufacturer, Lockheed Martin. They're all US companies, and the US is not part of that treaty. So they didn't stop making cluster bombs because the US asked them to. In fact, when the Trump administration asked Orbital ATK if they'd start making them again, Orbital ATK came back and said pressure from activists, states, and NGOs is leading to divestment from companies with revenue tied to cluster munitions production and deployment. Because many of the banks identified in public naming and shaming campaigns are American, the US is bound to feel the brunt of the pressure. Continuing to rely on cluster weapons exposes the US military to international backlash. Now, they didn't quite say that the US defense industry was also subject to backlash, but we can clearly see that when the weapons producers themselves say that the naming and shaming of banks who invest in them make it impossible to keep making the weapons, we should take the hint. This is a useful strategy, but can it work with nuclear weapons? It's starting to. In fact, after the ban treaty was adopted, a number of financial institutions did just that. Amalgamated Bank in the US, ABP, which is the Dutch civil pension fund. It's one of the 5 largest pension funds in the world. And KBC, a Belgian bank that operates in Belgium, Italy, France. All of them directly cited the ban treaty as a reason to divest from nuclear weapon producers. And what's cool about this is it's something that you and I can help make happen. It's as easy as picking up the phone. I know a lot of people don't like to pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. It makes a difference. If you don't want to pick up the phone and call your bank, you can also tag them on Facebook. In fact, it was a small group of people who tagged their bank on Facebook and asked questions about that bank's investments that got one of the major Swedish banks to divest. And that one bank cascaded into others. Now across Sweden, across Scandinavia, even Nordea, one of the biggest banks in the Scandinavian region, have policies that say no to nuclear weapons. They no longer invest. And it's because banks need you and your money to make those types of investments. And come on, let's be honest, the financial sector has a bit of a PR problem, especially after the bailouts that were seen to profit the few at the expense of the many. I'm sure I'm not the only one who remembers Occupy. Financial institutions are trying to make themselves look good. Hundreds of them are investing in ways to support the Sustainable Development Goals. They publish leaflets talking about how great they are at supporting women's maternal health and doing micro-targeted investment. It makes them potentially very vulnerable for public pressure. And it's an easy opening for us. We can ask them, oh, you like the SDGs? What are you doing about number 16? Peace. Effective institutions. Are you avoiding investment in nuclear weapons? and other controversial weapons? Because remember, they need you to work. They need your money, your support, you as a client, in order to be able to lend money to the companies that produce nuclear bombs. And that means you are the one with agency, with choice, and with power. At the end of the day, there aren't that many companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons. We've identified about 30 of them. And it's pretty easy to cut 30 companies out of your investment portfolio. It doesn't take a lot of work. It doesn't take a lot of extra research. In fact, a simple phone call can make all the difference. See, those guys who can decide whether or not to launch the bombs, they aren't really the ones with agency in this situation. They're the front men, the ones stories get told about because those stories help to prop up the status quo and they discourage meaningful change. And the more those dudes sit in the spotlight, the easier it is for them to make you and I feel powerless. But what we have seen from the ban treaty, from the divestment efforts around weapons, is that we are not powerless. We are a civil society. We can end nuclear weapons. So I encourage us all to use our power, follow the money, stop it from flowing into the production of weapons. Take a small step, make some change. Because diplomacy, negotiation, cooperation, and these little steps, that is the real story of power. And it's our story together. Thank you.
Susie, thank you very much. It's not often that people tell us that, you know, that we are the ones who can do something about such a huge problem. And it's just very hopeful to hear this message. So thank you. I would like to open it up to questions, and you can ask questions in a couple of ways. There's a Q&A area that you can contribute your questions to. And I believe, I'm not sure if there's a raise hand feature on this, but there definitely is a Q&A. And I already see a question here in the Q&A from Hunter, who says, thank you. I'm not sure if you see them at the same time I do, Susie. I'll read it out for everyone. Thank you for speaking. I believe this speech was powerful by itself. Out of the three you mentioned, which do you think is the most important to tackle first? I feel like money would be a good route to tackle head on. As you explained, without money, they cannot manufacture nuclear weapons. Surely cannot be cheap, and without funding, impossible to create.
It's a great question. Thanks so much, Hunter. There's two direct paths to cut off the money, right? So one is through the financial sector, because as I said, without the money that you have in your bank account, banks can't loan money to companies like Northrop Grumman. And if Northrop Grumman can't get those loans, it doesn't have the capital to secure the contracts. So going through this divestment route is a really clear, it's a path to end nuclear weapons, but it's not the only monetary pathway. The other is through the official path, through cutting off military spending from the, through Congress, because Congress officially has the power of the purse. And that is something where, you know, every year there are massive debates over the National Defense Authorization Act. And that's where you find, you know, questions need to get asked a little bit more forcefully. Where is the money going? Because it makes a big difference. Like, if even just asking questions requires a justification for why there is a why there's a decision to allocate resources in this direction. And it's overwhelming, the amount of money that is invested in nuclear bombs, which could be going elsewhere. I think it's about last year it was something like $138,000 a minute that was spent on nuclear weapons. And frankly, I think all of us could use that money to go into things like healthcare, to go into things like diplomacy, which are the real pathways to peace and to war prevention. So, you know, you could take personal action through personal finances, whether it be yours, family members, churches, clubs, endowments. University endowments are really powerful when it comes to divestment activities. That's what kind of triggered snowball effects all over the world and helped end apartheid in South Africa. Was, oh, this focus. University students saying, not the endowment that supports our school. And so there are a lot of ways, and I encourage you to get more. I forgot to mention, we have we do this project, Don't Bank on the Bomb. It has a website with all this information as well. It's don'tbankonthebomb.com, and I'll drop a note into the chat around that. Thanks again, Hunter, for your question.
Great. There's a lot of questions coming in from Ethan. Once funding is cut, what is your suggested method to get rid of nuclear weapons?
Great. I love this question because we need to. We need to do it in a way that is safe and secure, right? So there's some principles that were agreed about how you do disarmament generally. You want to do it in a way that's transparent so people know what's happening, know the plan. And you want to do it so it's verifiable, so you can prove that you actually did it, nobody cheats. And you want to do it so it's irreversible. So you can't just turn around and be like, hey, everybody thinks we got rid of this, but we just hit them in the backyard. All right, bad joke. They're quite big. They don't really fit in my backyard. But so those are three core principles. To get there, what we've seen so far, okay, there's 9 countries that have nuclear weapons in their arsenals right now. There were 14 other countries that wanted to make them and decided not to. And South Africa and Kazakhstan both had them and got rid of them. And so there are processes to dismantle them, to separate, like the first step is to separate the warhead, that the part that goes from its delivery system, the missile, or the gravity bomb. There's not so many gravity bombs, but to separate those two, that's a huge step that reduces risk. And it's quick and easy, relatively quick and easy. And then from there, the warhead itself needs to be dismantled in a way that the components, the key components of it, the highly enriched uranium or plutonium, are isolated from the environment for about 7,000 generations, right? We need to protect this for about 150,000 years. It's really, 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 really long time. Nobody's figured out how to do that yet. There's a lot of debate. I think other speakers have spoken on this or will be speaking on this tomorrow, including one of my mentors in this area, Arjun Makhijani. I encourage you to listen to what he has to say on this. He's amazing. So you have to dismantle them. Now, the likelihood that all of the nuclear armed states are going to do this at the same time is not super likely, but we have really good experience of how to take apart bombs already. There used to be 70,000 in the world. There's only 13,000 now. We know how to get rid of them. In fact, we know how to turn them into other stuff. There's a great company in California that turns old ICBMs into really pretty jewelry and bottle openers. They're called Beers Not Bombs. I mean, so I can get behind that. And so there's ways to do that. The highly enriched uranium and the plutonium need to be isolated. It will take additional negotiations between the nuclear armed states for what they feel comfortable with. But we'll get there. And there's a pathway to get there through the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That means you have strong safeguards, you have investigations, you check what people are doing, and you have everybody come to the table so that you can build cooperative security. At the end of the day, we all want to feel safe. I just don't feel safe with nuclear weapons in the world. So
Susan has asked us, I think that one person alone, me, won't make a difference to my very large bank. Are there ways to build a campaign by a large group of the bank's customers to pressure the bank to stop investing in nuclear weapons?
Thanks, Susan. It's a great question. And don't underestimate your own power with your bank. I'm not kidding. We have seen some very persistent individuals get through to the corporate social responsibility officer at a bank and actually get change. So really don't underestimate yourself. And even the big banks, even Bank of America, Wells Fargo, these are big banks with a lot of investments, but they do respond to client pressure. Of course, absolutely, it's better to go in with others. And there are some campaigns that are targeting some specific institutions. If you want to get in touch with me, I don't have the full list at the top of my head, but we're definitely tracking and trying to put people in touch with one another as much as possible. So please feel free to reach out to me. Let me know what bank you're looking at, and I can help connect you with others who are involved. There are a lot of great campaign activities happening all over the world.
Faith asks, thank you for the lecture. I'm guessing the US isn't on board with the treaty you mentioned. I agree with the point you made about using the money for better purposes.
Cool. You're right. The US isn't on board. The US isn't so great at joining up to treaties. In case you didn't notice, it's like, it's not a super high on the priority list in the US. It requires 2/3 of the Senate to get behind it, and that's not so easy. But the thing is, the US is still impacted by other countries joining treaties, and we can't underestimate that effect. We've seen it with cluster bombs. We've seen it with children's rights. You know, the US is not party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but child labor is still illegal across the US, right? They're impacted by this. And that's why, you know, we build up that kind of customary norm, we build up the societal stigma against bad things in order to build the world that we want. So even if they're not on board with the treaty right now, they are often kind of held to the spirit of that treaty by pressure both from within as well as from their friends in other countries and their frenemies in other countries too.
Thank you. We have a student who's asking, what countries have the most atomic weapons besides the United States?
Great question. So there are 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons, right? So the one that has the most, Russia has the most. The United States has the second most. There's not that much difference between the two. They have 95% of all the nuclear weapons on the planet. So they're around 5,000, between 5,000 and 6,000 each. France, the UK, China, actually France and China both have about 300. The UK has about 200. India, Pakistan have a little over 100 each. Israel has up to 100, but shh, they don't admit it. North Korea has maybe 10, although that number might be going up. Did I forget anybody? I think that's it. Yeah, there's also 5 countries that host US nuclear weapons, including the one where I live. So there's about 20 bombs, 20 American bombs, US bombs here in the Netherlands, another 20 in Belgium, some more in Germany, some more in Italy. And oddly enough, quite a few are still in Turkey, which always makes me really super nervous, because no matter what you think about nuclear weapons, the coup attempt that happened a couple of years ago in Turkey was staged from the base that hosts US nuclear bombs. And that's just super sketchy and not a good plan. And I really, really, really hope that they secretly got moved out just for everybody's safety. Nobody wants to see those go off. And yeah, so 9 countries, about 13,000 bombs. US and Russia have the most. Also, the US and Russia have they have bilateral deals, bilateral agreements to bring the numbers down, right? So this, you may have seen in the news, there's sometimes discussion around the new, what's called the New START Treaty. And that's an agreement between the US and Russia, which is actually, it brings the numbers of deployed nuclear weapons. So weapons that are out either in the ocean or they're ready to be used from missile silos. It brings those numbers down to less than 2,000 each. And they can have others in storage. It also requires them to provide a lot of information about each other's nuclear weapons programs, about the programs, about the weapons themselves. It requires quick notice that they're going to do exercises. And that is a really important risk reduction element, because there's been quite a few times in the world where we've nearly had a nuclear war start. Unfortunately, a higher number than most people like to think about, myself included. And they start either because there was an exercise, a military exercise going on that wasn't clearly communicated and people misjudged and thought there was a war starting, which could be, you see 13,000 soldiers going, on your border, you kind of get worried. Or because of computer error, or in one case, mistaking a weather balloon for an incoming nuclear missile. And the thing about the New START agreement is that it requires this kind of transparency and this information to be shared, so that there's less likelihood of that type of accidents and those types of mistakes. It expires in February. And it could, like, the Russians are like, yeah, we're totally ready to sign up and to renew this. It doesn't take anything, but it takes Putin and Trump to both say, yes, we'll do this, and to sign a paper. It doesn't require Congress. It's already been through Congress. It doesn't require more money. The money's already allocated. It just requires the two of them to say, yes, we'll do this. But unfortunately, the current US administration is not willing to do that. And it's putting everybody on the planet at risk. It is it's probably the scariest time around nuclear weapons that we've ever lived through. That's like scarier than the Cuban Missile Crisis, is the time that we're living in now, because the risks, the belligerence, and the technological changes around some of the weapons and some of the weapons launch systems are they're making it a greater danger than most people want to think about, and it's certainly much greater danger than the press wants to talk about. It's not as fun as dudes, yelling at each other. That's apparently fun. That's news, instead of, oh my gosh, existential threat for the planet, which is worrying. Yes. So sorry, that's not a cheery note. I want to like keep focus on a cheery note, because it is really, really bad. But at the same time, there's like this double things happening, and I really want to remind people that when things are the worst and the superficial in the short term, that's often because they're getting the best when you can take the longer view of history. Right? So we're sitting here, and yes, it's probably the scariest and the riskiest time when it comes to nuclear weapons, but the Cuban Missile Crisis triggered international negotiations that halted a nuclear arms race that would have involved 30 countries, right? We have 9 now that have nuclear weapons, but there were 14 others who wanted them. And then we're convinced not to, because they're like, oh my gosh, Cuban Missile Crisis is terrifying. We don't want to get into that. Oh my gosh, we need to go to diplomacy. We're going to do the hard work of negotiations. And because of that, the world is safer. So it's a terrifying time right now, but there is hope. And there is a path forward. We have a treaty. Nuclear weapons will be illegal early next year, for the first time since they were invented 75 years ago. And that changes everything and nothing. It changes everything in the long view. And the day afterwards, it'll be like, okay, yeah, whatever. So I think we have to remember, and we have to give ourselves patience and courage and faith that we can get the end of this weapon, because we will.
Susie, thank you so much. I know that you're doing a workshop tomorrow, turning knowledge into action. It's about political activism, turning our knowledge into action. And I would encourage people to join that workshop. You can find it on the Westheimer website. I really want to thank you because I know it's about 1 a.m. right now where you're at, and you've been up a long time and with us at this symposium all day as well. So thank you so much for being up late with us. And if anyone has additional questions that maybe didn't get to Susie, I'm happy, you can send them to me by email and I'm happy to field them and reach out to Susie with anything that you might have related to her work. Visit Don't Bank on the Bomb, which she put in the chat, which will give you valuable information about where investments are being made toward nuclear weapons or how to find out about those investments. And we just really appreciate the work that you're doing. And feel free to follow Susie on Twitter. She's there on Twitter and Instagram. So, and I'm going to do that actually probably this evening. So yeah, so I'm really, really glad to have you with us. Thank you again. And we're going to end the session for this evening. I want to thank all the participants for being with us and your patience as we navigated the technical issues. We did learn that Zoom indeed had a crash between Zoom and Facebook. So there was nothing that our tech folks could have done. It's being registered as a known issue. So we really are sorry that had to happen, but it was out of our control for tonight. So thank you again and look forward to seeing you all back tomorrow for another great day of programming. Go to the Westheimer schedule, wilmington.edu, westheimer.edu. Sorry, let me try this again. Wilmington.edu/Westheimer. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.